Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our panelists. Chief Executive Officer, National Math and Science Initiative, Sarah Martinez Tucker. Founder, President and CEO, Chobani Incorporated, Hamdi Ulukaya. President, Community Relations, Target Corporation, Laisha Ward. Founder, the Eva Longoria Foundation, Eva Longoria. And please welcome back as our moderator, President Bill Clinton.
So this panel is about restoring the American dream. I wrote about this a couple of years ago, and I have to say even I was surprised to see that there were at least 9 advanced economies of the 32 nations in the OECD that seem to have more social mobility than America. That is, their version of the American dream, the likelihood that a child could do better than his or her parents or could come to a country as an immigrant and dramatically improve their circumstances has become greater in some countries than in ours. And I spent a lot of time thinking about this. And if you notice, we have the head of 2 different educational efforts in different ways. Then we have a representative of one of America's great big companies with, I think you said, over 350,000 employees. And then we have, I have to say this since I live in New York, one of America's great startups, Chobani, a New York company. And we're going to talk about this. And I really do want the panelists to say whatever they want to say, but I think it's just by way of setting up the situation, well, let's talk about a little bad news and a little good news. Here's the bad news. In 1975, 8% of Americans were on food stamps. In the depths of the recession, it got up to 15,000. But 15%, excuse me. However, the Congressional Budget Office predicts that even if unemployment drops all the way to 4.6% by 2017, there will not be more than a 10% drop in the number of people on food stamps because the poverty rate will still be so high. In the recovery so far, low-wage jobs have grown 2.5 times faster than mid-wage and higher-wage jobs. The good news is that education does still matter. As I said earlier, people with a college degree, particularly people under 35 with a college degree, have an unemployment rate of a little over 3%. People who finish high school, only about 11% in that age group. So education still matters. But there are a lot of other things that matter, and it's harder and harder for poor kids, and the percentage of poor children living in poverty has gone up. So all these folks have their different life experiences as well as the work they're doing now. And I think I'd just like to, I'll start and sort of go down the line. I want to start with Eva, who just got her master's degree from Cal State Northridge, a school I helped to repair after the earthquake. I knew I had an ulterior motive, and it turned out it was all about making sure you had a place to go to school. But you're from Texas. You grew up in not the greatest of circumstances. You got yourself a university degree. You went to California. You made a career. Then you went back and got a master's degree. And all along, you've been concerned about other people who grew up in circumstances like yours who, A, didn't get to go to college, and D, didn't become a star. So tell us what you're doing now and what you think we have to do, particularly for women and girls, to make sure they get their share of the American dream.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you to the panel. I'm so excited to be here. I am from Texas, grew up in a family of 4 girls, and I grew up in a family of women. So that's where my educational journey began, because I grew up in a family of strong women and educated women. So college was an option for all of us. We didn't know how we were going to pay for it, but we knew we were going. And that's one of the big problems with our community is even being open to the dream of college. And I decided to go back to get my master's in Chicano Studies, which is Mexican-American history, because I was very curious about a lot of things that I didn't know the answers to. And I also thought, and I know, and I think, that model behavior is very important in our community. And so if I was able to go back and get my master's degree, that young Latinas all over the country would see, if she did it, I can do it. And I recognize my platform for that. But for me, I focus, I know all of us are focusing on education. I know Sara is doing amazing things, and Leisha's doing amazing things, and you're just amazing. But when we look at the landscape of America and how it's changing, everybody knows it's changing in a very Latin way. We're not only now the largest minority in the United States, but we are the majority of students in California, Texas, New Mexico. And the future economic success of this country is dependent upon how we educate our community, being the Latino community. Within that community, I focus on Latinas, which is the women of our community, because we know women are the linchpin of many societies and communities. And so for me, my foundation, and why I wanted to create my foundation, was to focus in on how do we best intervene in the cycle of poverty within the Latino community. So how do we break the cycle of poverty, and what's the most effective intervention? And it always comes back to education. So my foundation focuses on how do we overcome the barriers and the obstacles that Latinas face in attaining or reaching their educational potential. And unfortunately, in the bad news about the research that my foundation has done is that the barriers and obstacles have not changed. In the past 30 years, these barriers are the same barriers, whether it's socioeconomic status, ineffective teachers, ineffective schools, tracking. There's a lot of barriers that have not changed, and we can change. A lot of the gains that we made in the civil rights movement regarding education for minorities and for women have been dismantled. We have a very important decision being made today about affirmative action. So my foundation wants to focus on what are we doing right? So we commissioned a study to say, to identify what have the Latinas who have succeeded doing, and how can we replicate those. And we were really surprised with what we found. We found extracurricular activities was very important, because for Latinas it's a sense of belonging. Exposure to Latina or Latino teachers, role models, and mentors is very important. When they see a reflection of themselves in somebody of authority, they're more likely to emulate that. Tracking and early exposure to math, which is tied together. If they're not exposed early enough to math and reading, then they don't track well, and then they're forever stuck in a low track, and then they're not college ready by the time they get to high school. So there are a lot of things that my foundation is doing to help these obstacles and to replicate what we're doing right, and that's what I'm trying to do to contribute to Latinas reaching their educational potential. So there's a lot. I ramble a lot.
I want to come back to some of this, but let me just sort of follow up. Leisha, we were talking about what Target does backstage to support early childhood education and also to support the communities in which your stores are involved. And I'd like to say something about both these things. Last year there was a flurry of articles and one important book written by a professor, I believe at Princeton, about whether the American corporation sort of lost its way beginning 30 or 35 years ago, alleging that, I think with some accuracy generally, alleging that between World War II and the mid-'70s, give or take, we built the world's greatest middle class, and we did it with big companies as well as little ones. And the big publicly held companies were treated as and run as public trusts who had responsibilities to their shareholders, their employers, their customers, and the consumers, the communities of which they were a part. And then when capital could take global flight and go anywhere, there became an enormous premium on satisfying shareholders with quarterly results in a way that diminished the involvement of American companies with the upward mobility of their employees and their customers and their communities. Whether you believe that or not, Target's tried to address that. So talk to us a little bit about what you do in early childhood education and what you do in your communities is a part of your business strategy, and what it could do for at least the people you touch to help give more opportunities and mobility.
Thank you, Mr. President. It's an honor to be here, and to the esteemed panelists who are here with us this morning. Target really has a foundation in connecting economic progress and societal progress. And the tone starts at the top. Our CEO, Greg Steinhoffel, like our founder, believes that successful businesses also include successful communities. The two are inextricably linked. One cannot thrive without the other. And today, in fact, if you're familiar with the work of Michael Porter and Mark Kramer around shared value, those are the tenets upon which our foundation and our company were grounded in. And those principles of ensuring that we have a strong economic, social, and environmental well-being platform guide us today and ensure that we're applying that approach to our workforce development, how we recruit, retain the best talent all across this country, our sustainability practices, our corporate philanthropy and service initiatives, our focus on health and well-being, our focus on safe communities, and responsible sourcing. All are grounded in this premise of economic progress connected to social progress. And those tenets allow us as a company to soar with our strengths. What are the core assets and competencies that a company like Target has? And how can we apply those core competencies to solve big business challenges and grow the economy, but also solve some of the nation's most pressing social issues? And one of those pressing social issues clearly is education. Our guests or our consumers have told us that education is one of the top social concerns to them, and we've leveraged those insights to improve the education system in this country with a particular focus on K through 12 education. Because we know that clearly education is a pathway out of poverty. Education is a pathway into economic opportunity and social mobility, and we believe that it begins with early childhood education and continues with lifelong learning, but grounded in a foundation of early childhood learning. And for us, we've made a commitment to give $1 billion to education by the end of 2015 with an emphasis on K through 3 literacy. Because we know that students who are reading proficiently by the end of 3rd grade are 4 times more likely to graduate from high school. I think it's also very foundational, and in fact foundational to be able to do well in math and science and the other STEM courses as well. So we're very focused on early childhood literacy and ensuring that we're creating really a pipeline of students who can go on to graduate from high school ready for some form of post-secondary education. Hopefully you've seen the Grad Nation report that shows that graduation rates in this country are actually on the rise, up to 78% from 72%. But important to note that the achievement gap still persists. So if you disaggregate the data, which I think is very important, and look at that 78% graduation rate, it is only 68% for the Latino community and only 62% for African Americans. And if we are going to achieve a 90% high school graduation rate that the America's Promise Alliance has as a goal by 2020, achieve the president's college attainment rate of 60% by 2020, we have to close the achievement gap for Latinos, for African Americans, and low-income students. But I would also argue we need to raise the bar for all students' performance in this country. Because if you look at how we're performing as a country against global statistics, we're falling behind. And if we're going to remain globally competitive, innovative, and ensure that our national security remains strong, we must continue to educate the leaders of the future, the workforce of the future, and quite frankly, future consumers as well.
Well, by the way, to support your priority on early childhood literacy, there's a lot of evidence that the dropout rate really picks up after the 8th grade, because if you can't read, then every course you're taking is all Greek to you. I mean, it's just a lost cause. So I think that's important. But what you say is also important, because the income correlations are enormous between level of education and the ability to A, get a job, and B, get a job with a rising income. But do you focus you talked about your founder. Tell them who your founder was.
George Draper Dayton, an incredible leader. And the tenets of the company, which I think are so extraordinary, they tithed at church and they wanted their company to tithe as well. So Target gives 5% of our profit back to the communities in which we do business, which is an extraordinary contribution.
This is a huge deal. The reason I mention this, is one of the Daytons became a senator and then governor of Minnesota. And he runs his politics, and a lot of people think he's way too liberal, but basically he's running his politics the way the Dayton family ran Target. They always felt like their communities were a big part of their constituency. And they were people coming in and buying things. And one of the things I was going to ask you, and maybe we should go to Sarah on this, but I'm worried that one of the key drivers of opportunity in our country, certainly all through the 90s when we were doing pretty well, was a massive influx of people into our 2-year community colleges, from which increasing numbers of them then went on to 4-year colleges. And if you look at what's happened to the budgets and the economy in California, for example, a lot of these 2-year colleges can no longer expand. And then so a lot of people literally desperate for opportunities have gone to a lot of these for-profit schools, some of which are good and some of which are just mills to churn out federal aid and use federal aid, and so there's been a lot of discussion of this. But what about when they get out? How are we doing? And how much does the absence of proper preparation in high school in math and science cut off opportunities, and how much does simply cost and access cut off opportunities? Sarah, you want to talk a little about that?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President. And also, I'm delighted to be here with my panelists. And I want to take a moment and thank all of you. I looked at the participant list last night. You're doing phenomenal things. And if you're doing that, or if you're supporting the people doing things, let me just thank you for being part of CGI. I think the two opposite ends of the spectrum that scare me is the jobs that are going to be created in the next 5 years, some 47 million jobs. 2/3 of those are going to require education beyond high school, and over half of those, it's the baccalaureate degree. So that's one end. On the other end, and Leisha mentioned this, 70% of our kids are graduating, and only 1/3 of those are ready for college-level work. And so the remediation that has to take place, that often takes place in these 2-year colleges, often becomes the stop-out. And so what we figured is, and Eva said it, and it was very insightful, Eva, when you said it, the tracking that's happening with kids. It used to be in the old days that you could, in public schools, sort the bright kids and give them access to that rigorous curriculum for the new jobs that were being created. We can't do that anymore. We've got to look at all kids. Leisha had a great post on blended learning. We've got to meet all kids where they are and give them access to the most rigorous curriculum. And you said it, math, science, those become the gateways really for a child making it onto college. Sadly today in this country, if you look at access to the rigorous content, you can look at IB, you can look at AP, 10% of our juniors and seniors had access to AP classes and tests. And if you disaggregate the data, as you did, Leisha, 4% of African Americans and 6% of Hispanics. We can't have this country needing college graduates or college level work and have our schools producing kids that are not ready for that by not having rigorous content. We also don't have the ability to put teachers that are content experts that drive student achievement. 2/3 of our middle school kids are being taught math by teachers who didn't either major in math or get a certificate in that. And 1/3 of our middle school kids are being taught by science teachers that don't have the credentials in science. So we've got to get content-rich teachers that are going to drive student achievement. We've also got to get rigorous curriculum for all our kids. 49 million American students are in our public schools, and they deserve access to a curriculum that's going to have them leave college and work ready, and they deserve access to a quality teacher.
Let me ask you something. A few years ago, the president said we needed 100,000 more STEM teachers. And tomorrow at our closing, you will see what I think is arguably the most astonishing achievement by CGI America commitment makers to close that gap. But is that too few? Do we need more? How much is the shortage of truly trained, just in your field, math and science teachers, in your opinion?
And I don't want to forget the language arts because they matter, because you talked about reading even. I don't want to forget that. Given the churn, we get 23% of our teachers are leaving. I think that, and given the retirement that's coming with the baby boom generation retirement, I think that number is a stretch for us, but we're not stretching enough. I think we need to, and my organization, the National Math and Science Initiative, is going to be part of that announcement tomorrow. We're producing 15,000 teachers, math and science teachers, by 2025. But as a country, if we don't retain, then that 23% loss means that 100% every year, that 100,000 every year, we're losing ground because of that, of the teachers that are leaving the profession. So I think it's important to put those teachers, but we've also got to develop the retention strategies to make sure that we get the most value out of those great teachers. And there's a terrific opportunity to partner them with corporate. If we think about what they do in the summer, if we connect them with corporate so that when they go back to the classroom, they can talk about what they're teaching and how it connects to the careers that are out there in corporate, I think we have a tremendous opportunity, but 100,000 is low.
That's kind of what I figured. Let me, I want to go to Hamdi now, because if you know the story of Chobani, you would be convinced that if we had 100 people like him, day after tomorrow, the unemployment rate in the country would be 3%, and the GDP growth would be 4% a year for the next 10 years, and everybody's wages would double about every 5 years. It's an astonishing story. It's an immigrant story. It's I got an SBA loan story with nothing to. It's an amazing story. So, in 2 minutes, just tell them what you've done. It's breathtaking. And then the question I want to ask you is, how much can we learn from your experience, and what can we do to make more people like you? They don't all have to be market dominators and have thousands of employees, but what can we learn that would help to increase economic mobility in this country by creating more opportunities? But first, tell them your story so everybody will know.
Thank you, Mr. President, and I'm honored to be among amazing panelists in the conference. I've been following this conference for every year and watched them online, and I know it's really helped tremendously, so thank you for that. I'm from Turkey. I came as just another immigrant story, but you said 2 minutes, so I'll start towards the end. I saw an ad. It said, fully equipped yogurt plant for sale. And it was kind of came as a junk mail, and I was going through my junk mails. And out of curiosity, next day I went to see this factory. It was about an hour and a half from where I was. And it was in a very small town. There was a bar across the street. It was about 90 years old. It had a 1920 on the wall, on the top wall. This is a very, very old factory. It was being closed by a large food corporations. And at that time, when I had a tour of the factory, there was about 55 people were preparing plant to be closed. After the tour, I called my attorney and I said, I just saw a plant and it's really a good price and I want to buy it. And he said three things to me. One, he said, first of all, here's a large company is closing and they are making yogurt. And who do you think you are that you know better that when these people are closing? The second thing he said, that you're buying as is, and this is almost 100 years old factory, God knows what you're taking as a responsibility. And then the third thing he said, well, you don't have money to buy it. So that was enough reason to give up. But the next day I would wake up just like any other entrepreneur would do it. So finally I got it with an SBA loan because there was I would never forget those two bankers, and they said, you know, there's this 504 program that SBA has, that they would give 40% of the loan guarantee, 50, I'm sorry. We will come with the 40, you come with the 10, but we have a collateral of the whole investment, so that will work. With that, I had the key for the factory in August 17, 2005, and I hired 4 people from that 55 people. They were factory workers, an office clerk, and a maintenance person and a wastewater person. And I had a yogurt master and myself. We had the first board meeting that day. And that day, I will never forget, Mike, who's the maintenance guy, asked, what are we going to do now? I said, let's go to Ace Hardware store. There was no Target there. And let's get some paint, white paint, and let's paint the walls. I said that because I had no other idea. And Mike said, we have not painted those walls for the last 15 years. Why do you care? And I remember saying it that, Mike, we got to start from somewhere. And I don't like the paints outside, and let's do that. And that's what we did that summer. We painted the walls. I came up with some ideas how to make it blue around the windows, red around the doors. And I worked 2 years in that factory, coming up with an idea, what kind of product, how I can do it, and all that stuff. And we launched it in September 2007 with 300 cases. And fast forward, right now we are over $1 billion. We're probably going to finish the year 1.2, 1.3 billion in sales. That factory, that old factory, became one of the largest yogurt factory in the world. Right now, we have 2,000 people working in that factory. And we built a factory in Twin Falls, Idaho, in the other part of the country, which is an amazing, amazing place. We built in 326 days, 1 million square feet. We spent $450 million. 2,000 Idaho men, they worked day and night. We had lights on the field, and we finished it. Now about 800 people are working there. And during this process, when we started, end of 2007 to end of 2012 and now, we have stayed completely independent. So we did not bring any investors or any other outside money. So we grew within our own cash generations. And this is the story that started in a very small town, upstate New York, and made this awesome product in the right way. And the consumers spread the word, which is going against the big guys, which dominated the market for almost 30, 40 years, had factories, had international presence, had marketing money and all that stuff. But with this grassroots, with new way, and consumers' passion around the product, it took off, and we are #1 brand in the country now. And we're growing we're growing this first 6 months of this year is about 50%. So it's the first time a startup, actually, I think the Fortune said it yesterday or the day before, that it's a yogurt company grew as fast as in Google and Facebook. So it's not, it doesn't have to be a technology company. But sir, I realized 3 things during this journey, which I didn't know that I learned during this. One is, if you are a startup, you really don't have to be in a big cities in San Francisco and New York City. You could be in a small town in South Edmonston, and you could still be cool. You could make something really awesome. You can make your dream come true. The second thing I realized, that one of the most important things exists, which is the passion, can-do, trust, hard work, will get your back, that kind of attitudes that lives in those small towns, which around the growth, when you have this type of growth, you will need that kind of values come into the work, where in our story, we work 7 days, 360, 24 hours, Christmas, Thanksgiving, every day. But every time I would do it, I would ask them, and says, should we stop or should we keep going? And they said, of course we will go. Let's do more. So the community there, they get together. But in order for the community to get together, you have to open the walls of the factory to the community, make them part of it. And that's what we did. We opened up our factories and make sure that they were proud of the product that we were making, and they were part of the story. So that brought not only the factory, people in the work factory, but everybody surrounding that came into the pictures. The third thing that I realized, that if you have a purpose, that why you're doing what you're doing, which in the beginning we said we want to have delicious product, nutritious product, natural product for everybody, because everybody deserves to have an access to great tasting product. And while we are doing it, let's build things around it, but let's not destroy things around it. So with this one, when you have the purpose, then everybody comes into the enterprise, everybody comes into the company or the community, then the passion comes, then everybody keeps the ownership and takes it to the next level. And that's why we think that what happened has happened.
So it's amazing. Turkish guy goes to upstate New York, buys a 90-year-old building to make Greek yogurt. Miracles occur. I mean, so what's your advice, though? If you were all of a sudden to take a leave of absence and go to work for the Joint Economic Committee of Congress and then the National Economic Council in the White House, and they said, we have one question for you. How can we have more stories like this? They may not, obviously far fewer than 1% will come to dominate a market in 5 years. That's not going to happen. But an enormous percentage of the employment is now being created by small businesses and self-employed people. When I came to the White House in '93, there were only 3 million people who were making a living on their own in their homes. Now, when I left office, it was 12 million, and I think it's like around 25 now or more. So what would you do? If you were to take off your running Chobani hat and say, here's how to make more people like me, what would you advise people to do? What do you think the most important things we can do are?
Mr. President, I know you made it easy, but SBA works. You supported it. You get more fund when you were president, and you made the application easier. Without an SBA, I couldn't have done what I have done. I think that program works. I think it should be more funds available, and I think it should be more spreadable and more easy. You should get it easier. So that's really, really important, that especially for the startups, when they don't have interest from bankers and private equities or whatever that is, that the state and local and federal funds to the manufacturers, especially startup small businesses, is so important, and it works. It really brightens those dark days early on, and I wouldn't have done it without it.
How long did it take him to give you an answer?
Was pretty short. It was within 2 months that I had an answer. Now, given that the offices from region to region, it makes a difference. That happens to be the office that we worked with in Albany was really a great office. They were passionate, they wanted to get it done, and they were fast. So I don't know how it is in the other part of the world, but other part of the country, but the SBA really works, and I think it should go to the next level. If I'm kind of crazy with this idea, but if I hear that somebody is going to open a factory or a small operation in a very small town and certain population, I would give whatever it takes. I would give tax credits, money, whatever that person needs, I will give it to them. Because what happens is, when factory opens, then the truck drivers, then the restaurants, then the hotels, then the other, give us a quick example, sir. We opened that factory, then there are 5 other factories around the country that 100% working for Chobani factory. So that has an effect of bringing more and more in some certain part of the country. The third thing that I would say, maybe it's not part of the government, but how can we make this starting up in a small towns is cool again? I know we're doing a lot of technology startups. It's good and makes the life better. I know apps are good and it connects us really nicely. But how can we make parents or the professors in the schools or the advisor to say, starting up something in a very small community is also a very cool thing to do. And if we switch that and shift that a little bit, then maybe coming back to those, heartland America and starting it, that could create a movement. Then everyone, because there are a lot of talents that can come in. The new way of thinking, the new generation of way thinking, if we can come into manufacturing world, that think about the manufacturing in a different way, which I believe the management and the people in the factory cannot be separated. It has to be in the same wagon. It has to be together. These people who's making the goods has to feel proud. They have to feel proud of what they're making, and they have to have a total pictures of what the company is going. Without that connection, then you cannot have, cost effective, you cannot be fast enough, you cannot have everybody come into the picture. So within those 3-4 areas, and I think when we can look at it economically, one of the best opportunity for the businessmen, for the businesses, is manufacturing. The manufacturing making in this country is going to be the most profitable thing in the next 5-10 years if we see it. Walmart says, I'm going to bring $550 billion worth of manufacturing products back to the country.
This is very interesting. In the 80s, when I wanted to ask you about this and ask, particularly, maybe you know what the Target policy is, but when I was governor and Walmart, is headquartered in Arkansas, and there was this big competition with Kmart, and we were about to lose Sanyo, a Japanese company, had a television plant in the eastern part of our state. It was about to close down. So I called Walmart and I said, "You sell Sanyo televisions?" And they said, "No." I said, "These are made here. If I go to Japan and make a deal for a big bulk deal, will you buy them? Will you sell them?" Then there was another, Van Heusen shirt company was going to close down, and a husband and wife team who'd worked there were willing to take it over. I said, "Will you sell those shirts?" Well, anyway, we put together this Buy America program, and for one period before the Chinese swallowed us whole, Walmart had 55% of its products made in America as compared with 45% for Kmart, and there weren't any Target stores in my home state at the time, so I couldn't comment. But anyway.
You've subsequently found some, though.
What?
You've subsequently found some Target.
Yeah, you did. So anyway, then it just became impossible for all of them because of the economics. What is happening now, this is very important, because I get asked about this all the time, and I've seen a lot of press about it, is the cost of labor is, relatively speaking, becoming a smaller part of manufacturing because they're so productive. And the cost of materials and transportation and energy are becoming more important. And so we can win big on transportation cost, access to market, and on energy costs now, and be competitive on materials. So I think there's going to be a huge movement back to the United States potentially, but I think that it's a real chance to do what you talked about, to put more and more of these plants in small and medium-sized towns where it will make a big difference. And it's something I think you all should think about because it's really important. Everybody says it's not as important anymore, they don't employ as many people. That is ludicrous. For one thing, you get all this R&D, and the people like to have their R&D near where they produce. So But we got to keep working to keep the SBA clean. President Obama supported a big increase in investment in the SBA. But when Erskine Bowles was head of it, we talked about this before, he took the application form from an inch thick to a page front and back, and said by then, at that time, we were averaging telling people yes or no within 3 months, and he tried to get it down to 3 weeks. I think he got skidded at about a month. So that's about how long it took you, right? A month. So I really appreciate your saying this.
Can I say something specifically to minorities and small business in the SBA, because I think the SBA does an amazing job, and you mentioned it. The difference from office to office and state to state is the inconsistency is a problem, because Latinas, specifically Latinas, start small businesses 6 times the national average. They're one of the most entrepreneurial groups we have in this country. And one of the problems that they face is access to capital and technical training. And so I know Hillary said it earlier, is you need the partnership with the public sector and the private sector. So the public sector can change those conditions that discrimination exists, particularly with women and loans and lending and minorities and the process and the complication of really not knowing how to navigate institutions or banks. So I think the public sector can help with the conditions of that. What the private sector can do, which my foundation does, is the technical training side. How to write a business plan, how to do back office, profit and loss, the bookkeeping, the training, so that they are prepared when they do walk into an institution, and then they are faced with a 5-page or a 1-page or a 100-page document to fill out, that they understand the process and give them the tools to succeed so that they can start small businesses so we can have economic growth.
How much does Target work with your suppliers who have jobs in America to try to help them bolster their employment base and stuff?
We work very closely with our suppliers, both domestically and all over the world, to ensure that we are creating jobs, not only the 365,000 people who work for Target, but that there is a strong base of economic growth for those vendors who do work with us. And many of them are women, quite frankly, Eva. So in many places here in the United States and all over the globe, we're doing a great deal of work that really do stand up women who are driving change and economic growth for their communities.
I'm not trying to cause you any problems here, but why do you think that of all the companies that operate in your space, you think it's just the culture that you were given to the founders, that you seem to be more heavily involved in your communities and with people than a lot of your competitors are? It hasn't hurt your bottom line, has it?
We continue to grow. We have been very successful. We're nearly a $70 billion company, and we employ, again, over 365 team members all over the world. We have an extraordinary team. We have millions of guests who choose to shop with us because we provide high-quality, well-designed products at a great price. But they also choose to shop with us because we have a commitment to corporate social responsibility, to doing the right things, to being an ethically run company.
So you think that's good for your business?
I think that's great for our bottom line. Investors choose to invest with us because they know that we're committed to doing the right thing for our team members who work for us, for the guests who shop with us, for our investors, for the communities in which we do business. We partner and collaborate, and think we're successful because we listen and we learn and we act locally, partnering with the communities in which we do business so that we can thrive together. We do the work with and through others, and that partnership and collaboration at the local level is definitely a strong point of differentiation for Target.
I just wanted, when you were talking about manufacturing, I was reminded, I saw my friend Pat Pineda here earlier today. She's with Toyota, one of the sponsors here at CGI. And I was on the advisory council at Toyota when they decided to bring manufacturing into the United States. And it was a very, as Hamdi said earlier, I mean, the packages that the governors put together mattered. But Toyota also was looking for the education level at the communities in which they were building. And the National Association of Manufacturers will tell you today that 60% of factory floor jobs require math beyond high school. And as we look to make manufacturing in small towns cool, we've got to remember that every school needs to start producing college and work ready. And work ready today means beyond high school. And the good news is that the interventions that we do at the National Math and Science Initiative, they've worked at low-income schools, they've worked at urban schools, rural schools, And we just have to remember that you said everybody deserves delicious yogurt that's good for them. Every kid deserves the rigorous education and a great teacher if we're going to be able to have manufacturing be cool again.
Can I make one comment? I would agree
Yeah,
with
go
you.
ahead.
Every child deserves a quality education regardless of race
Yeah.
or socioeconomic status. And one of the things I think that's going to help us get there is a topic that is somewhat controversial, and that's the Common Core standards. And so I do hope that as a part of this conversation over the next couple of days,
Good
we
for
talk
you.
about the importance of Common Core
Excellent.
standards. Raising and elevating academic achievement requires that we have higher standards, that we raise the bar, that we provide support services that help us all get there and hold ourselves accountable. And it's difficult today. Each state, each school district, each school has different standards. It's difficult for us to compare ourselves and to scale the things that are working and to deprioritize the things that are not working. And Common Core is coming. It will be difficult. As standards are raised, we'll likely see lower scores, and that's going to scare people. I hope we have the political will and courage to stay the course. The children of this country deserve nothing less.
I'm so glad you mentioned that. I'm so glad you mentioned that. If and it's insulting to every racial and ethnic group in America to suggest that we can't master them if we know what the deal is. You know, there's been a lot written about the breathtaking rise up the global rankings, believe it or not, of the Finnish school system. And the Finns, you say, oh, there's 5 million people and they're all Nordic. What do you expect? It's not true. The Finns have students from 44 different national and racial groups in them. They've become quite diverse, and there is no substantial difference by race or ethnicity in the performance of the kids in their school district. Because they're just 5 million, they have a common core. I tried when I was president to get my version of the Common Core, a set of national standards developed by a group called NAGBI, which some of you in education will know about. It's a totally nonpartisan deal. The former Republican governor of Michigan, John Engler, who later became head of the Manufacturers Association, was the chairman of it when I was president. There was no politics in it. And God, I was accused of destroying local schools and everything in the wide world. And now you know all these things that are being said about the Common Core. I thank you for having the courage to say something about it. We got to quit hiding behind rocks and put it all out in the open and, you know, get going. So thank you for saying that. I just want to say one other thing about this whole manufacturing business. There are all these opportunities we haven't even discussed yet. But we have to, if you train people for the jobs that are there, then you train for people for the jobs that are coming, no matter what, then you train people for the jobs you want. You can't get to any of those stages unless first they have a good base to stand on. And I've always thought that we could, if we ever got the economy in shape again and enough so that there'd be a reasonable revenue flow to the state and local governments, that we could really gin up the 2-year schools again and use them as a way stage for lower income young people who could then get into the 4-year schools and rely more and more on the federal student loan program, because the federal student loan program is cheaper now. The federal student loan program, even if you have to borrow a lot of money, you can, as a matter of law now, pay your college loan back as a small fixed percent of your income over up to 20 years. And if you haven't paid it back in 20 years, the rest is forgiven. So what's killing kids with all this student debt is the debt that's outside the student loan program. And what's killing them in the terms of access to affordable education is that the states are so stressed with their budgets that the only place they can go, even if they're qualified for aid, is into some of these for-profit schools. As I said, some of them are good and some of them are terrible. And it's right to have we need to have a scrutiny there that's higher than we've had. But I think, I think what you've all said makes sense. It's inherently unreasonable that you can't bring back income mobility and the American dream in a country that has people from everywhere, ties to every market in the world, fabulous companies, a great scientific and technological base, and still, whatever else you want to say, the finest system of undergraduate higher education in the world by light years. And the real problem we've got, and this, I will leave this and let's see if anybody wants to make a comment on this, is that almost every problem in American education has been solved by somebody somewhere, but the solutions don't travel well. And that's what gave real impetus to the whole charter school movement. Unfortunately, their solutions haven't traveled all that well either. I mean, you know, we had one charter school when I became president in Minnesota, St. Paul, and we funded 2,000 when I was president and left money for 1,000 more. But the deal was that they were supposed to keep their charters if they performed well and lose them if they didn't. And the ones who performed well were supposed to be helping the other schools. And that has happened, as far as I know, on a consistent basis, only in Rhode Island, partly because of the budget problems they've had, that they've worked together. So I would just give all of you a chance to say one last thing before we close about this, but it's especially an issue with our Latino population, men and women. It's our largest minority now, and pretty soon America's going to be a majority-minority country, and that's a good thing. It means we'll be well-positioned for the world if we're well-prepared for the world. We're already well-positioned. We got to be well-prepared, and then we'll have to keep doing things to create more Chobanis.
I'm going to talk about something you mentioned earlier, Sarah, which was the community colleges and how Latinos are over-indexing in community colleges. And one reason is socioeconomic status. That's all they can afford. But the other one is the remedial classes. A lot of them do try to go to four-year colleges, find out they are not prepared, therefore they drop out of the four-year, go to the community college, and then that's what we call the stop-out rate. You know, where they just stop at the 2-year and they don't go forward. Where that's a problem with our community, specifically in STEM fields, is STEM, as we all know, is built upon building blocks. If you don't have algebra, then you can't take calculus. And if you missed out on calculus, you're not going to go into physics. And so if one of those blocks is missing, it discourages you to go forward because the curriculum is just too hard. 1% of all STEM careers are occupied by a Latina. 1%. So we have to improve that in order for our country to succeed. If this is going to be the future workforce, we need to figure this out. Second, our community colleges need to do a better job at transferring out those who do well in community colleges. And I think what you talked about, student debt, is STEM fields require longer periods of study, minimum of 4, almost up to 12. You want to be a doctor, you want to be a scientist, you want to be a biologist, you want to be a mathematician. You need 4 to 8 years of investment within your education, and that's just not possible for some of the people in the Latino community. So I think we have to take a really good look at community colleges with STEM preparation and making sure that Latinos transfer out.
Maybe if I could bridge on that. I can't help, though, but remember when you're talking about the student debt, when I served in the administration, I was meeting with students at Iowa State, and a couple of the people were really quiet, and they were graduating. And I said, you seem a little down, you should be celebrating. And one young man said to me, I wish I could do it over so I could start at a community college because I wouldn't owe as much money as I owe today. That breaks your heart when a family should be celebrating. But I guess what I would say as a final, and I said this a little early, 3 things that you always do 3, I'll do 3 as well. We have to stop tracking kids. We have to believe that all kids need access to rigorous curriculum. Number 2, Leisha, I mentioned earlier her post, we've got to meet every kid where they are and get them to where we need them to be and where they really want to be. We're in 17 schools, the National Math and Science Initiative in your home state of Arkansas, and our schools were responsible for 78% of the state's increase in math and science. We've proven that every kid that has access to a good curriculum and a good teacher can make a difference. But the third thing I'd say is we have to remember that as we're having these conversations, these young students that we're trying to solve for are very vulnerable and they're very perceptive. They know what's going on. And I think the hardest thing for me is to sit with students, and I'll never forget Stacy in Seattle saying, Mrs. Tucker, I've heard you say several times during our session that I'm college material, but I started thinking since this morning when I came to school, I've had 5 different teachers or counselors make me feel like I'm not college material. Or to look in the eyes of our young Hispanic or African American kids and have them say to me, you know, everybody in my school says that college is for everybody, but you can tell by who the counselors and teachers spend time with, who they think is college material and who isn't. Our kids are picking up on these signals as we're having these conversations, and so let's stop the tracking, let's meet them where they are, and let's remember that messaging matters to our kids because they're picking up on what we're saying.
Agree with everything, obviously, that Eva and Sarah have said. I would add that it shouldn't be about either public, private, or charter. It isn't an either or, it's an and. And we should be a performance-based culture, and those schools that have the ability to drive outcomes and raise student achievement are where we should be investing resources, and those that aren't, we should be deprioritizing. And so it's very important for us to get the best ideas that really do move the needle. And so many students today are in public schools. We have to address the public school system in this country. That's where the volume is. And we need to have solutions that are scalable. I would also add that it's important to think about this notion of personalization and customization in learning. It's something certainly that's sweeping the country in all aspects of business, but it's important to be thinking about personalization and customization in learning. Teaching the same way to all students is not effective. Really ensuring that we're able to teach to an individual student's needs is critically important so that those that are behind can be caught up and those that are ahead can be even pushed harder to reach their full potential at a pace and path and place that makes sense for them. So I'm excited about the opportunity to really optimize this convergence of physical and digital learning so that we really can leverage technology as a tool and asset that doesn't take away from the importance of having an effective, high-quality teacher in every classroom. We know that is critically important and the #1 indicator of success in the classroom setting. But technology can help be a game changer in education, I believe. And so we have to be open to what technology can bring and will do in education. And again, back to your point, every child can learn. And I want that to be my last point. I still don't believe in this country that fundamentally we believe that every child can learn. And we have to believe that every child can learn, therefore they will learn. You know, one of the things I think Target has done quite well is this notion of democratizing design. We brought high-quality, affordable design to the masses. Now we're focused on also democratizing a high-quality education for all. Every child can learn and should have the opportunity to reach their full potential, regardless of race, regardless of socioeconomic income, regardless of their zip code. And that's something that is important for every single one of us in this room to take to heart with a sense of urgency so that we don't leave here talking about it and not doing anything about it. It's a serious issue in this country. And it boils down to supply and demand, right? We need more parents, more businesses, more citizens demanding a high-quality education for every child in this country. When you demand it, we will mobilize and meet it with a supply of high-quality teachers, high-quality schools, high-quality resources that fill the gap.
Thank you. There's 2 brief things I think we ought to just leave in the atmosphere here appropriate to what you said. One is that we all know that different people learn different ways, and yet the predominant mode of teaching for our kids is sit down, shut up, listen, and do what I tell you to do. And we know, for example, there are a lot of people who learn better if there are arts in this integrated into math and science. There are all these schools in Oklahoma and in North Carolina and a handful in Arkansas where the kids' scores have gone off the charts by integrating that. We know that a lot of people, kids, young kids, learn math better through software programs on a computer. But we don't have good testing devices that tell us in advance, here is how your brain works, here is how your brain works, this is what would be most effective. So we really do need to work on that. The other thing I would say is, I think these massive online open courses, these so-called MOOCs, have enormous potential to lower the cost and increase the quality of not only college, but also high school and junior high school education. But people like you, we are going to have to trust to figure out how much of education can be done online, how much needs to be done on site, and how do we credit these things. It's a big challenge for us, but if we can do it, it could lead, I'm convinced if we did it right, it would lead to breathtaking increases in levels of education, in levels of learning, and in levels of interest. But we got to do it right. We're over time, but weren't they good? Didn't you think? They were great. And all I can tell you, next time somebody badmouths America's potential for building a new generation of entrepreneurs, tell them the Chobani story. It almost sounds like one of those bad Irish bar jokes. Turkish guy walks into a little town in upstate New York, opens a Greek yogurt thing. It's a great story, and it's now extended. And then he goes to Idaho. You know, there's a huge Turkish community in Idaho that couldn't wait for him to get there. That's what we got, folks. We got somebody here from everywhere, and we just need to unleash them. So let's give our panelists a hand. Thank you.